Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Thanks for joining today. I wanted to do a spotlight episode today where we talk a little bit more about Kingston Yard. We do have a previous video discussing a little bit about Kingston Yard after you run the manifest trains, but this time I wanted to specifically talk about how we use Kingston Yard to break down the interchange trains after they come through, how we classify cars in Kingston Yard, kind of how we try to simulate a bit of a prototypical operation if this were a real yard, and also kind of the different things that make this more or less the divisional yard for the North Texas Beltline. Also, we will discuss just a little bit about how Kingston Yard builds the locals, and we'll talk about the different areas that you can classify cars. So, first up, all right, this is obviously one of the most important jobs on the North Texas Beltline. There are 3 trains that originate here, and there are 6 that come in and stop and exchange cars. So there are 2 tracks that have to be kept open at all times. Those are your RD tracks 0 and 2, which are over here in the middle. Is these 3 shorter tracks where if you go back and watch the episodes on the manifest trains, it is the outside tracks, or sorry, they are the outside tracks from those manifest trains where they come into Kingston Yard. We also have Kingston Yard Track 0 itself, not an RD track, but overall Kingston Yard Track 0 also has to be left open. And this is just to make sure that you have somewhere to go when you are trying to switch cars. So after Track 0, we have Track 1. Track 1 is just used for storage. So sometimes, you know, JMRI will have you throw a car onto a storage track just for holding. Since we have a lot of car movement, this doesn't happen very often, but it is occasional. And, you know, when it happens, we definitely take advantage of that. Same thing for Track 2, it's just another storage track. If you wanted to, you could decide to change that, and you could just keep them open all the time, but I let JMRI throw cars on there on the rare occasion that it does. But yeah, it's not very often. Now, here's where it starts to get busy. Track 3 is by far the busiest track in the yard. So Kingston Yard is broken into a west end and an east end. If you're looking at the layout from the aisle, the west end is to the left and the east end is to the right. So the west end, we have Track 3 is for holding cars that go to the McGuire local, which was my most recent video on the NTB. So those cars came from Track 3 west. And then Track 3 east is where we hold cars that go to the East Greenville local, which just has, I think, 3 industries over there. It's pretty much exclusively just covered hoppers that go on that local. All the industries over there that it serves pretty much exclusively take just covered hoppers. 2 bays, 3 bays, 4 bays, you know, different types of covered hoppers, but they're all covered. Then, of course, you have Track 4 is next. Track 4 is used for building the West Greenville turn, which is a very busy train. It is also the only train that is required to be fully blocked before it can leave the yard. And so, you know, if you were doing multiplayer and you had an east and a west side crew, the east side crew would actually be the crew that would block that train. And in the instructions that I've created for Kingston Yard, I do have the order with which you should block that train based on destination for the rail cars, so that the switching by the local crew can actually make some sort of sense. Even after blocking the train, it still takes about 2 hours to run that local. So if you don't block that train, it's going to take anywhere from 3.5 to probably 5 hours to run that local. Hence why you want to block the train. And then next up is Track 5. So this is where we store cars that go to the Santa Fe interchange. If you go back and watch 2 videos back from the NTB, you'll see the KCS and the Santa Fe interchanges. So the Santa Fe train picks up off of Track 5, and the KCS interchange train picks up off of Track 6. Track 6 is the track in Kingston Yard that is closest to the aisle. All right, so if you're not quite sure where stuff is, just start at the aisle. That's Track 6, and work your way away, and it counts down. All right, so all the way to Track 0, and then you pick up with RD Track 0, RD Track 1, and RD Track 2. Next up after that, we have what's called the Paris Interchange Track. So I did a couple live streams where we ran some trains to Paris and back. And in those live streams, we did talk about the Paris Interchange Track, but it's actually a siding that's off to the north of the yard. And it's along the main line that bypasses the yard, but it's accessed from the east side of Kingston Yard. There's a crossover over there that lets you access the Paris Interchange Track. And that's for setting out any cars that are going to be picked up by trains going to Paris, and also for picking up cars later after they get dropped off by trains that are coming from Paris. And then, of course, we have the loop track. This is an unofficial track, but it's by the classification bowl, and it's just an opportunity to be able to run around everything in the yard if you need to. It's kind of like an interior yard bypass track. And then the only tracks I haven't mentioned are the 8 classification tracks. So these classification tracks can be used for whatever you need. I personally don't use them very often. I usually mostly just use them to store cars for the Paris interchange track. But if you do like to do some level switching and some car kicking, they're set aside just for that. So, but you do not have to use those in order to make things work. All right, and so typically, the kind of the general operating rules here in Kingston Yard, whenever a train comes in and terminates in the yard, meaning that it drops off all of its cars in the yard, pretty much all the cars are either going to go on to track 1, track 2, track 3, 4, 5, or 6, or possibly RD track 1 or the Paris interchange track. Once again, you got to leave your track 0 open. You got to leave your RD tracks 0 and 2 open, just in case those manifest trains are coming in. You always want to make sure those are open. So pretty much at the start of an operating day, Kingston Yard would start building the locals that are going to be going out that day. And by the time they get those locals built, the manifest trains would be coming in. Then, once the manifest trains clear out, you can have the locals run, and then you can start breaking down the manifest trains, or at least what they left over. And then, once your locals get back, you can start breaking those locals down. And then, typically after the locals run, you can have the interchange trains come in, or you can have them come in whenever it's convenient. And then, of course, you'd want to break the cars down that the interchange train brings in and, put them on their parking track. So definitely plenty to do and lots to stay busy. And then if you ever get some time, you'd want to start blocking the West Greenville turn, because that takes probably about an hour usually to block that train. And, we try to simulate the fact that Kingston Yard has its own yard limits. So, you want to make sure that if you're doing the operation inside Kingston Yard, you want to make sure that you don't get past any signals that would put you out on the main or a siding without dispatcher permission. And that's just, to simulate the fact that the yard master, if he's your boss because you're a yard crew, you're going to have to stay in his yard, and you're not going to be able to go out. So we do have yard leads on both sides of Kingston Yard, so that ideally you never have to actually leave the yard limits if you're working the yard crew. There is also a rip track, there's an engine service facility, there is a refueling track, a sand track, all of those kinds of goodies as well. I did not simulate those yet in JMRI. That is planned eventually at some point. I haven't done it yet because I haven't needed to, but I did those with the intent of simulating them so you can, ship cars to the rip track from time to time, and also ship, sand cars and diesel cars in for the engine service facility. And I guess last thing we can talk about, whenever you want to build your locals, you only are required to block the West Greenville local, which we have discussed already, but you can block other locals if you have time. So, any cars going to Paris or the McGuire local or the East Greenville turn. If you want to, you can block those as well. But honestly, the East Greenville turn, if you're going to block them, just block them by destination. And then when it comes to the interchange trains, don't worry about it. When it comes to the McGuire local, honestly, I never block the McGuire local because that local goes over to Farmersville and it has its own little yard over there where it can do some switching. So that's one of those trains that it's easiest to just build it, get it out of the yard, and get it out of your way, and let them go do the work out on the line. So that's just my personal opinion on that one. But Kingston Yard is one of my favorite places to be. We definitely model it here on the NTB as the primary divisional yard for the railroad. That's why there's a lot of different trains that interact here. There's really only about 3 trains that don't interact with Kingston Yard in some way. But of course, there are a lot of trains on the route that don't interact with Kingston Yard at all because they don't come past the yard. But there's only 3 trains that drive past the yard and don't interact with it. So the majority of trains, I think it's 9 of them, that drive past Kingston Yard do have to come into the yard and interact. So very busy yard, lots of fun. I wish I could say it's a real place. Kingston itself, the town, is a real place. But the yard, of course, like most things on this layout, as in all of them, are not real and are fictional. So it's been a lot of fun, though. As more time goes on and we have more operations, I'll show off a bit more of Kingston Yard. Maybe one day we might have a live stream or something, or we have to do some switching in Kingston Yard because it's definitely fun. There are a ton of details I could talk about, but I don't want to ramble on forever and bore you guys. So thanks for tuning in today as we discuss a bit about Kingston Yard. Enjoy the footage as we switch some trains, and make sure to stay tuned for some upcoming videos that I have in the works. So thanks again for joining, being part of the channel. If you haven't noticed, we've just reached just over 200 subscribers, so thank you all very much for that. That would definitely not be possible without all of you. So once again, appreciate it very much. Thanks for being a part of the channel. Thanks for being a part of everything we're doing here at DH Trainz, and we will see you guys next time.